On the hunt for comfortable, timeless Western boots? You already know the best place to shop for quality boots is at your local Tacova store. So stop by Tacova's Nashville, at the Mall at Green Hills, or on Broadway by Ryman Auditorium. That's right, you now have 2 locations to choose from. Grab a cold one as you shop and get fitted by a pro. Tacova's Nashville is at your service, and you can find your perfectly fitted dream boots with the help of their expert staff. Everyone will be asking where you got your sick new boots, but I won't be asking because I know they must be Tacova's. That's TECOVAS.com. Don't go gently, y'all. Today on CityCast Nashville, I'm here with Dr. Carol Busey, who recently retired as a professor of history at Volunteer State Community College and serves as the vice president of the Tennessee Historical Society. She was the lead researcher for the Nashville Public Library's Votes for Women room and is the official Davidson County historian. Sunday, August 18th, was the 104th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, and we want to remind you of Tennessee's key role in its passing. CityCast Nashville is presented by our exclusive launch sponsor, Tacova's. It's August 20th, I'm Grace Fuse, and this is what Nashville's talking about. Before the 19th Amendment, what was the status of women's voting rights in the U.S.?
Well, women had absolutely no status at all in any of the states, and the suffrage movement for women to have the right to vote came out of the abolition movement. Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton met outside an anti-slavery convention in London, and they wouldn't let the women even in and be seated at the anti-slavery movement. They came home and ultimately had called a meeting at the Seneca Falls, New York, at a church there. And out of this came this long list of grievances that women had. And buried near the bottom was, you've denied women the right to elective franchise, to have the vote. And so that's where it started. Now, this is 1848, mind you, and the country is moving towards the Civil War. Now, we didn't really have much action down here in Tennessee until well after the Civil War, really around 1900. And the South, the people who were organizing the national suffrage movement, which had started out with Susan B. Anthony and then Carrie Chapman Catt replaced her, they knew that the South were the states that were going to be the most difficult to get women's rights into. Married women had no property rights. They had no rights to their children. If a woman had a job in a factory, her money was turned over to her husband. Women had no rights. And so the Tennessee women began to become aware of this, and yet they knew that being a southern state where one of the states where slavery had been legal, that it was going to be impossible because giving women the right to vote would challenge the Jim Crow laws that the South had already put in place in all of the states of the Confederacy to make sure that Black people couldn't vote. Literacy tests, all sorts of things were put as barriers. And so Carrie Chapman Catt really began to look at the South, and she began to look at how we could get this done. And so they decided to go for an amendment to the United States Constitution. It was introduced in Congress time after time after time, but it was not until Woodrow Wilson was president that both houses of Congress passed that amendment to go be sent out to the states for ratification. So here you've got to get now 3/4 of the 48 states to say, yes, we approve this. And the Tennessee women really didn't think that they had a chance of ratifying it, getting our General Assembly to have a session and ratify this amendment, but they were really looking forward to the day when it did take place. As soon as the amendment came out of Congress, some of those Midwestern states and Northeastern states ratified it very quickly. And on Susan B. Anthony's birthday in February, a whole bunch of states ratified, and we got to 32. 33, 34, 35, and
Yeah.
no 36 was in sight. So the Tennessee Suffrage League, which had very well organized themselves in all three grand divisions, lots of women were involved in society, women of all walks of life, religions, and other things. And they were having their convention, their state convention in May of 1920, and they bring in, and this is a shocking thing for the South. They brought in a Black woman named Frankie Pierce, and she got up there and said, "What will we do with the vote? We will use it to uplift our people." And that was kind of a theme of the Black Women's Club movement, is we want to uplift our people. Well, nobody thought that it mattered in Tennessee. But these women were tenacious enough to think that they could get a special session called by the governor of the state, Governor Roberts. And so they came up with this theme: we want to be the perfect 36. Now, this was used in the movie days of 1920s as a way to describe a woman's ideal figure. 36, 22, 36, the hourglass
yes,
look. So there was a play on words there. These Tennessee women are very clever. Governor Roberts called the special session to take place. And so here is Carrie Chapman Catt, who doesn't think too much of Southern women, I don't think. And she had already showed up. She got off the train down there at Union Station, and she came to the Hermitage Hotel and checked in. So that became the suffrage headquarters, but it was also the anti-suffrage headquarters. If you opposed women's suffrage, you wore a red flower on your lapel or on your dress, whatever you were wearing. And if you supported women voting, you wore a yellow rose or a yellow flower. And so this became known as the War of the Roses. And so all of this activity is taking place as the legislators are getting off the train at Union Station. And so anyway, it was quite a battle. And it ultimately passed in the Tennessee Senate fairly easily by a pretty good vote. The Senate ratified it, and it passed right through. So now we are down to one house away from women across the United States getting the right to vote. And the suffragists, as they had surveyed these men in the members of the House, they really thought they had a clear majority of the vote. But as it came time and they kept postponing the vote, it came out of committee, and the Speaker of the House, Seth Walker, says he's going to step down and speak against the amendment as a member of the House, and the Speaker pro tem takes the gavel. And so Seth Walker gives this talk, and he wants to table the amendment and not even vote on it. But that did not pass, and so the roll call vote starts, and they start going down the list. And you get to the B's, and there is the name of young Harry Byrne. He is a young legislator. He is from East Tennessee, up above Chattanooga, Nyota, Tennessee. And he's wearing a red rose. And so he, in his meek little voice, is what I imagine him having. He was a small man. He stands up and bravely says, "I vote for the suffrage cause." Well, pandemonium broke out. And then they go down the road, the list, and they get to Banks Turner, who is from West Tennessee, from Trenton, Tennessee, and he also votes aye. And so the vote passed because of those two votes there. And the women were up in the balcony in the House chamber. They are crying. They are hugging each other. Rose petals are flying down. The antis are chasing the legislators for not voting against it. And chaos takes place. But Governor Roberts signed the bill. Now, after the bill passed, the antis had a huge meeting a few nights later at the Ryman Auditorium to call another session to undo the vote. But that did not hold, and it went to Washington. Governor Roberts signed it. It went to Washington, and it was given to the Secretary of State to sign it into the Constitution. And it was by Tennessee's holding on and persevering that these women were able to accomplish this. And when you think about all of the women that were affected by this, it's really, really phenomenal. Now, out there in Texas, in the middle of nowhere, was my grandmother, Bess Bailey. And my mother was 5 years old. And my grandmother took her by the hand and went to Petty, Texas, which is just a bend in the road almost, to the Methodist Church and voted. And my grandmother and my mother voted every election for the rest of their lives.
I'm here with Dr. Carol Busey. What lessons can we learn from the suffrage movement that are relevant to today?
I think that organization is important, and they were very well organized. And, they also were very strategic about what they needed to do and how they needed to convince people. This has not yet ever really quite ended. And you see we came up with the Equal Rights Amendment. This was an idea that Alice Paul, who was from the National Woman's Party, the more radical women of the suffrage movement, and they wanted an Equal Rights Amendment. And Alice Paul wrote the first one, and it kept getting introduced in Congress, and finally it passed. And so when that passed, once again, it goes out to the states for a ratification. Now, Tennessee ratified the Equal Rights Amendment very quickly. And then what did they do? They turned around and voted against ratification. They undid their ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. So it's never been added to the Constitution. Now, I will say this. I think that although women lost the battle, they continue to make progress, as you see. And, I think that women continue to make strides in politics. There are more women in the Metro Council. There are more women in the state legislature than ever before. There are women in Congress. There are women running for president. I mean, who would have ever imagined that this day would come?
You were the lead researcher of the National Public Library's Votes for Women room commemorating the 100th anniversary of Tennessee's ratification of the 19th Amendment. What was your vision and your goal for curating that room in the library?
Well, first of all, I have three friends who brought me into this. One was Margaret Bim, Jeannie Nelson, and Julie Mosley. And Margaret Bim and her husband, Harlan Dodson, they were both lawyers. They had gone to New Zealand for a vacation. And they went into a museum in New Zealand about them being the first country to give women the right to vote. So Margaret comes back, and Jeannie Nelson is also a lawyer, and they start talking about we could do something like this in Nashville somewhere. And then they brought in Julie Mosley, who very active in the League of Women Voters and an excellent fundraiser. And Julie said, my husband said, don't ask for $50, don't ask for $100. Ask for $1,000, and then you may get $500. So they really brought a good team together. And then they realized that with all of the newspapers now digitized, there was no need for that room that had been the banner collection. So they convinced the library board to allow them, if they could raise the money, to put this in there. And Kim Hinton, who designed the room for the civil rights room made the Votes for Women room just a bookend. And so they have that halo around there. They've got some digital screens and touch screens and whatnot. Very interesting. And it really does bring people to the library with the votes for civil rights in one end and women's rights in the other. And a funny thing about the room, a couple of summers ago, the Vanderbilt football coach wanted to bring the football team in the summer. They were there for summer practice in Nashville for summer practice down there. And I mean, the staff said that they had those big old football players in those benches, but they were sitting there listening with rapt enthusiasm for the subject.
I love it. It's interesting that the Votes for Women room is right across from the Civil Rights room because the 19th Amendment did not actually give all women the right to vote. In fact, the 19th Amendment primarily benefited white women. It wasn't until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that barriers against women of color voting, particularly Black women in the South, were addressed.
We finally did away with the poll tax. That was kind of the ultimate thing, is getting rid of the poll tax. And I remember my mother had her last poll tax receipt in her wallet when she died at age 92. She was still carrying this Texas poll tax receipt around. So, and I think the civil rights movement and the women's rights movement have worked very well together because both groups are interested in voting rights and they're also interested in helping people participate in the democratic process.
Just one last stupid question, maybe. You talk about like the movement behind this being about empowerment, uplifting your people. Why would men ever vote for women to have the right to vote? Why did those last two guys decide to vote in favor of women's suffrage?
Excellent question. After the vote was over, some reporters caught Harry Byrne outside the Capitol, and they said to him, "Why did you change your vote?" Well, what nobody knew, and this is at the state archives, he had a letter in the inside pocket of his coat from his mother in Nyota, Tennessee. And it's a fascinating letter because it says, "Son, I've been reading the suffrage news," and something to the effect, "I haven't seen your name anywhere." Then it says, "Be a good boy, help Mrs. Cat put the rat in ratification." And he told the reporters, "I always take my mother's advice."
Hell yeah. Oh my God, I love that so much. Thank you so much. We're so happy that we had you here. It was great to learn more about this.
I was thrilled to have an opportunity to talk about it.
That's all for today here on CityCast Nashville. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend? Rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Nashville newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye!